Some places are born wrong, not haunted. That word is too clean, too familiar. It implies something came after. What I mean is wrong from the beginning. Built on the kind of ground that takes things and doesn't give them back. The kind of ground that was already keeping secrets before the first stone was laid. Camp ALICINE sits at the edge of Aldenmere, Pennsylvania, where the mountain gets dense and the woods get dark and the maps just stop. It was built by a man who loved his daughters so much he put walls around the place that ate them. He thought that would fix something. It didn't fix anything. This is what happened there. All of it. The parts the town remembers and the parts it buried. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Camp. The thing about Aldenmere is that it looks exactly like a town that would have a story like this. Small, quiet, tucked into the lower ridge of the Appalachians where the mountains press in close enough that the sun clears the tree line late and drops behind it early. Main Street had a diner, a hardware store, and a church that rang its bell every Sunday whether anyone came or not. A river ran along the eastern edge of town, cold even in July, fed by a waterfall nobody had officially named, but everyone called Francine's Drop, though most of the younger residents couldn't have told you why. They didn't know the story. Not the real one. The real one starts in 1949, when an Italian architect named Albert François followed his American wife Francesca to her home state and built a house on the mountain above Aldenmere. The house was large, ambitious, the kind of structure that announced itself. Stone foundation, wide porch, 4 chimneys. Albert had made his name designing buildings that lasted. He intended this one to last too. They had 5 children. None of them made it to adolescence. 3 died of fever in the winters of the early 1950s, one after the other, the way tragedy sometimes moves through a family like it has a list. The town brought food and said prayers and kept a respectful distance, the way small towns do when grief gets too large to look at directly. Then the twins disappeared. Alicia and Francine were 7 years old. It was a September afternoon, clear sky, no weather to blame. They walked into the woods at the edge of the property the way children do, without ceremony, without warning, and did not come back. Search parties went in for 11 days. They found 1 shoe, Francine's left foot, laces still tied. Nothing else, not a thread, not a sound. The woods above Aldenmere were dense in the way that feels deliberate. Old growth, tight canopy, ground that swallows footprints. There were sections the search parties refused to enter twice. Men who had hunted those hills their whole lives said the trees sat wrong in certain places, that the light bent differently, that sounds didn't carry the way they should. No one said this officially, but everyone stopped going up past the second ridge. Albert and Francesca left the mountain house the following spring. They moved into town, into a narrow clapboard house on Aldenmere's western edge, where Francesca lived until she was very old, and Albert lived until he wasn't. But Albert did not leave the mountain entirely. He came back to it. Spent 3 years designing something, not a home this time, not a monument, something that would put walls between the woods and whatever the woods wanted. What no one in Aldenmere knew, what Francesca herself never knew, was that Albert had not merely grieved his daughters. Albert François's mother had practiced something older than grief. The family called it richiamo, a calling back. The belief that death was a departure, and departure could be reversed if the price was sufficient. Albert had grown up watching his mother work. He had learned. He had kept it from his wife the way men keep things from people they love, which is to say completely, which is to say for years, which is to say until it was too late to explain. When his 2 favorite children died of fever, the first 2, the ones he had already memorized, already built his sense of himself around, Albert did not only mourn, he made a decision. The twins were 7 years old. They did not walk into the woods on their own. They were taken there. And what was done to them in those woods, in September of 1949, was done with precision and with love. which is the most terrifying combination a person can bring to anything. He offered Alicia and Francine to bring back the two who had died of fever. The ritual required it. The price for 2 lives was 2 lives. He did everything correctly, everything his mother had taught him. Nothing came back. He waited a month, a year, 3 years, nothing. So he built the camp. In 1954, Camp ALICINE opened. The name was his, a compression, Alicia, Francine, stitched together into one word, the way you hold 2 things in one hand when you're afraid to set either down. The camp was built with the precision of a man who trusted structure above everything else. Stone walls along the tree line, thick enough to discourage curiosity. The grounds were cleared, leveled, the creek rerouted slightly to run through the eastern edge of the property. A dock was built over the lake, a mess hall, 8 cabins, a fire pit, an equipment shed. On the south end of the property, where the mountain crested before dropping into the waterfall, Albert built a small wooden bench. No plaque, no inscription, just a bench facing the drop, the mist, the sound of water. He visited it every summer until he couldn't climb anymore. For nearly 2 decades, Camp ALICINE was exactly what it appeared to be, a place where children came for a week in June and left with bug bites and sunburns and stories. The walls held, the woods stayed back, and Albert Francois, respected architect, founder, community pillar, came every summer and sat on his bench and waited. He was not waiting for the camp to stay safe. He was waiting for the spell to answer. And while he waited, he worked. 50 years ago, 30 children came to Camp ALICINE and didn't leave. Not the way they were supposed to. It was June 14th, 1974. Scout Week. Kids between 9 and 14, backpacks bigger than some of them, all of them loud in the way children are loud when they don't know yet that the world bites. Their leaders set up tents by the creek. Someone burned the first batch of hot dogs. A girl named Carla won the first night's scavenger hunt and wouldn't let anyone forget it. For 3 days, it was exactly what a summer camp is supposed to be: stupid, loud, safe. On the morning of June 17, 1974, a ranger named Dale Pruitt rode in for a routine check. He heard the flies before he saw anything. What he found took the rest of his life to stop seeing. 30 bodies, every one of them decapitated, heads set apart from the bodies in a way that suggested placement, not rage. Deliberate, considered. And the livers. Every single liver had been removed with clean incisions, the kind that don't come from panic or fury, the kind that come from someone who knew exactly what they were doing and took their time doing it. No blood trail leading out, no footprints in the soil, no fibers, no fingerprints, nothing caught on the walls, nothing disturbed in the tree line. The crime scene unit from Harrisburg spent 11 days at Camp ALICINE and left with a box of nothing. Sheriff John Mitchell never got over it. He worked the case for 6 years after it was officially closed, long after his deputies had moved on, long after Harrisburg stopped returning his calls. His wife used to say the case killed their marriage the same way it had killed those kids, quietly and without explanation. The camp was locked, fenced, then fenced again with barbed wire when teenagers kept finding their way in. Warning signs in 3 languages. Nature moved in the way nature does when humans step back. Vines across the mess hall windows, weeds splitting the footpaths, a tree growing straight through what used to be cabin 4. The bench Albert had built on the south end was still there, facing the waterfall. Nobody touched it. Nobody could explain why. The town healed the way scar tissue heals. Functional, tight, not quite the same shape as before. The younger generation grew up hearing the story the way you hear any ghost story, half believing, half laughing, the way fear looks when it doesn't have anything real to attach to yet. They knew the name, Camp ALICINE. Most of them didn't know what it meant, didn't know there were 2 little girls folded into that word, that the camp had been built by a father trying to put walls around a grief he couldn't name. Then came the 50th anniversary. The memorial was held on a Tuesday because no one could agree on which exact day it had happened. The bodies had been there a while before Pruitt found them, and no one wanted to ask what that meant. Candles, folding chairs on the town square, 30 names read aloud, some so old now they belonged to people no one living had ever met. Mitchell came. 81 years old, moved with a cane, didn't speak to anyone. He sat in the back row and stared at the candles and left before the names were finished. That night, someone cut the fence at Camp ALICINE. Not teenagers. The padlock hadn't been cut. It had been opened. From the outside. With a key that shouldn't have existed anymore. And on the bench at the south end of the property, the one Albert François had built facing the waterfall, facing the drop, facing the woods beyond the wall. 2 small shoes were placed side by side. Left foot, right foot, laces still tied. Chapter 2. The Unwelcome Visitors. Aldenmere, Pennsylvania, September 2024. They called themselves investigators. Mitchell's granddaughter would later call them something less charitable, but that comes later. There were 5 of them, all juniors at Carlow University in Pittsburgh, all enrolled in Dr. Renata Voss's Independent Research Seminar, a course that existed mostly because Voss had tenure and unusual ideas about what constituted fieldwork. The seminar had 12 students. These 5 were the only ones who took the Camp ALICINE assignment seriously enough to actually go. Sarah Okafor had been the one to find the original case files. She'd spent a semester corresponding with the Aldenmere Historical Society, a single retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Holt, who ran it out of her living room, and had assembled a research folder thick enough to use as a weapon. Sarah didn't talk much about why the case had gotten under her skin the way it had. When people asked, she said it was academic. When she was alone, she thought about a girl named Carla, who had won a scavenger hunt and wouldn't let anyone forget it. Carla had been 11. Carla had been found 30 feet from the mess hall. Mark Tesaro carried more equipment than the rest of them combined. Thermal camera, 2 handheld audio recorders, a laptop, a drone he was absolutely not supposed to fly at night, and a portable signal booster because he didn't trust the mountain. He was the kind of person who triple-checked door locks and kept a backup phone battery in every jacket he owned. He was not, he would tell you, afraid of anything. He was just thorough. Lisa Jjoe had read every newspaper account of the massacre published between 1974 and 1981 and had opinions about all of them. Sharp, quiet, the kind of person who noticed things slightly before anyone else and filed them away without comment. She'd brought a notebook with a hard cover because she'd learned the hard way that spiral bindings catch on everything in dense underbrush. Tom Weller had come because Sarah had asked him to, and he had not yet figured out how to say no to Sarah. He believed in evidence. He believed in process. He did not believe in curses or hauntings or anything that couldn't be measured. He was going to spend this trip being right about everything, and it was going to drive everyone else insane, and he knew it and came anyway. Emily Rask had her own reasons and kept them mostly to herself. She'd grown up 40 miles from Aldenmere. Her grandmother had been one of the people at the memorial service 3 years ago. Not a relative of any of the victims, just someone old enough to remember the summer it happened. Emily had asked her grandmother once what it felt like in Aldenmere that year, the year after. Her grandmother had looked out the window for a long time before answering, like something was still hungry and hadn't finished. Emily had written that down. She still had the paper. They arrived in Aldenmere on a Thursday evening in late September. The town had not been welcoming. The woman at the front desk of their motel, a low brown building on Route 6 that smelled permanently of pine cleaner, had taken one look at their equipment bags and said, "You're not the first." When Sarah asked what happened to the others, the woman had gone back to her crossword and not looked up again. The mayor's office had declined their access request by voicemail, 11 seconds long. The word no appeared twice, and the word liability once, and that was the entire conversation as far as the mayor was concerned. A gas station attendant filling up their van had looked at the university logo on Lisa's jacket, looked at the direction they were facing, and said, "The camp will let you in. It's the getting out that's the problem." Then he'd gone inside and locked the door, even though it was 2 in the afternoon. Tom had said, "That's exactly the kind of thing someone says to scare off nosy students." No one argued with him, no one agreed either. They left at midnight, parked the van off a logging road a mile from the perimeter fence, loaded their packs in the dark. The night was cold for September, wrong cold, the kind that sits in your lungs, and the forest pressed in close on both sides of the trail. No wind. The trees didn't move, which should have meant quiet but somehow made it louder, the silence the kind that has weight to it, that pushes back. Mark had his thermal camera out before they'd gone a quarter mile. He kept pointing it at the tree line. "Anything?" Lisa asked. "Deer, probably," he said. He didn't sound sure. They reached the perimeter fence at midnight. Higher than the photographs had suggested, 12 feet, chain link over a concrete footer, the barbed wire at the top replaced recently enough that it still had its color. Warning signs every 15 feet. Someone was still maintaining this fence. Someone still cared that people stayed out. The padlock on the service gate was new too. Except, "That's open," Emily said. It was, not broken, not cut. The shackle raised, the lock body hanging loose, the chain looped through the gate the way you'd loop it if you wanted it to look locked from a distance. Tom said, "Probably the grounds crew." Nobody laughed. They went through one at a time. Sarah first, then Mark, then Lisa, then Emily, then Tom last because he spent 45 seconds examining the lock before following. The air on the other side of the fence was different. Colder, stiller. It had a smell. Not rot, not must. Something older than that. Something mineral. Like turned earth. Like depth. The camp materialized out of the dark as they moved the torches across it. The mess hall first. Long, low, the roof still mostly intact, vines growing over the window frames but not through them. The fire pit, stone circle, decades of ash. 4 of the 8 cabins standing. The dock at the lake's edge, planks warped but holding. Everything exactly where it would have been in 1974, the year the scouts arrived, the year they didn't leave. Sarah was the one who found the bench. She'd read enough about it in the historical files to recognize it without being told. South end of the property, facing the waterfall, the drop, the dark tree line beyond the wall. Albert Francois's bench. No inscription, just wood and intention. She almost walked past it. She didn't because of what was on it. 2 small shoes, side by side, left foot, right foot, laces still tied. Children's shoes, but not old. The soles were clean, the canvas still white in the torchlight. Not 50 years old, not even 50 days old. "Mark," she said. Her voice came out flat because she was working very hard to keep it that way. "Mark, I need you to film this." He did. Nobody spoke while he filmed. Tom opened his mouth once and closed it again. Emily was looking at the tree line beyond the wall. Past the drop. Into the part of the mountain that the maps had always stopped at. The part Albert Francois had built his walls against. The part where 2 little girls had walked into a September afternoon and never come back. "Something's in there," she said. "You can't know that," Tom said. Emily didn't answer. She was right, and they would all know it soon enough. But for now, she just stood at the edge of the torchlight and watched the dark watch them back. Chapter 3. The Dark Discoveries. They agreed to split up, which in hindsight was the first of several decisions that made a certain kind of sense at the time. Sarah and Mark took the cabins. Lisa and Tom took the forest. Emily stayed at base, running the equipment, logging timestamps, doing the work that looked less glamorous, but meant that when things went wrong, there would at least be a record. Tom had pointed out before they separated that nothing had gone wrong yet. Nobody responded to that either. The cabins were worse in daylight. At night, the darkness had softened the decay into something almost abstract. Morning light came through the broken windows in flat slabs and showed everything. The walls gone black with damp, the floors buckled, the metal cots rusted through in places where the frames had simply given up. Cabin 4 was the one with the tree growing through it. An oak, maybe 30 years old, coming straight up through the center of the floor and through the roof like the forest had made a point. Albert built the walls to keep something out, Emily said. She'd been quiet since morning, in the specific way of someone who'd been sitting alone all day with a thought they couldn't resolve. But he built them around the house, around whatever's in that basement. He built the camp as a memorial, Lisa said, for the twins. Or he built the camp to bring children here, Emily said, regularly, in groups. The fire wasn't lit. Nobody had suggested lighting it. The dark came in around them, and they let it, because some conversations happen better without light. Tom sat with his forearms on his knees. He looked at the ground between his feet for a long time. "I don't have an explanation," he said again, quieter this time, like he was saying it to himself, like he was trying to get used to the sound of it. Sarah looked at the logbook, at the photographs in her bag, all those living faces, at the 5 numbers Lisa had written in her notebook. "We're not leaving," she said. "Not yet." Nobody argued. That was almost worse than if they had. Sarah moved slowly. She wasn't looking for anything specific yet. She was letting the space tell her what it wanted her to see first. What she saw first was the photographs. They were tacked to the wall of cabin 2, protected from the worst of the weather by an overhang that had mostly held. A dozen of them, maybe more. Scout groups in front of the mess hall, kids at the dock, a campfire circle, someone mid-laugh, face blurred by movement. The kind of photographs every summer camp took, functional and cheerful, the visual evidence that everything was fine. She looked at them for a long time. 30 kids in this camp in June of 1974. She had memorized their names from the files. She found herself trying to match names to faces, and then stopped because the math of it, all these living faces, this particular week, this particular summer, was the kind of math that sat in your chest wrong if you let it. She took the photographs down carefully, every one of them, and put them in her bag. Mark called her from cabin 3. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not afraid exactly, but careful. The way a person sounds when they're choosing their next step. He'd found a floorboard that didn't sit flush. Underneath, a canvas bag, rotted through at the seams but still holding its shape. Inside the bag, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them better than anything had a right to be preserved, a scout leader's logbook, the last 2 weeks of entries, the handwriting increasingly erratic toward the end. Sarah opened it to the last page. The final entry was dated June 14th, 1974, 3 days before the ranger found the bodies. "They're coming from the wall side. Not the wood side, the wall side. I don't understand that. I don't understand why the walls wouldn't..." It stopped there, mid-sentence. The pen had dragged across the page when the writing stopped, leaving a long, fading line. Sarah stood very still for a moment. Then she took out her own notebook and wrote down every word. They found the house at 11 in the morning. Lisa had spotted the chimney first, rising above the canopy line a quarter-mile south of the cabins, on the slope leading up toward the waterfall. She'd pulled out her site map and looked at it for a long time. "That's not on any of the camp plans," she said. "Could be a ranger station," Tom said. "Ranger stations don't have 4 chimneys." They pushed through the undergrowth for 20 minutes before the house revealed itself. A clearing, abrupt and deliberate, and in the clearing a structure that had once been significant. Stone foundation, 4 chimneys, A wide porch now collapsed on one side, the windows black with grime or broken entirely. The front door hanging open at an angle, one hinge gone. Lisa knew what it was before she said it out loud. This is the Francois house. She'd seen the 1951 property survey in the historical files. The footprint matched. The chimneys matched. This was the house Albert had built for his family before the fevers and the disappearances, before he'd come back to this mountain with walls and intention and grief, and built something else entirely in its shadow. It had been here the whole time, inside the camp perimeter, behind the walls he'd erected to keep something out, or in. Tom was already at the door. Lisa called after him and he paused, which was the most she was going to get from him. "We should document the exterior first," she said. "I know," he said. He stepped inside anyway. The ground floor was stripped. Not decayed, stripped. The kind of empty that comes from removal, not abandonment. No furniture, no fittings, no fixtures. The walls bare except for the outlines where things had hung, darker rectangles on the plaster where frames had blocked the light for years. Someone had taken everything out. Someone had been thorough about it. The stairs held their weight. The upper floor was the same, emptied, methodical, nothing left that could tell you who had lived here. Lisa photographed everything. She was building a record. That was what she did when she was frightened. She documented, because documentation was the opposite of chaos. Tom found the door to the basement at the end of the upstairs hallway, the only door in the house that was closed, the only door that had been locked from the outside, the lock new, the same hardware as the front gate. He stepped back from it. For the first time since they'd arrived in Aldenmere, Tom Weller did not immediately advance toward the thing he was skeptical of. Lisa came up beside him, looked at the lock, looked at him. "Someone's been here recently," she said. "Yes. And locked this from the outside?" "Yes." "Which means either they locked something in, or they locked it because of what's down there," Tom said, "and they didn't want anyone to find it." He pulled out his multi-tool. Lisa didn't stop him. She started her audio recorder instead, stated the date and time and location in a low voice, and pointed her flashlight at the door. It took him 4 minutes to get the lock off. The smell hit them before the light did. Not rot, older than rot. Mineral, deep. The same smell Sarah had noticed when they'd come through the fence, but concentrated now, dense. The kind of smell that coats the back of your throat. The basement was large, larger than the footprint of the house suggested it should be, which meant it extended under the cleared ground outside, under the camp itself perhaps. That was a thought Lisa chose not to finish. Tom's flashlight swept the room. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The walls were stone, the same stone as the foundation, but the upper half of each wall had been covered with skin, human skin, stretched and cured like leather, treated with something that had preserved it, pinned flat with iron tacks in neat rows, the seams almost architectural in their precision. Albert had been an architect. The pattern was not accidental. She moved closer with the lantern. The skin on the walls was not uniform. The older sections, near the shelves, the ones here longest, were precise, seams aligned, edges finished. The iron tacks set at exact intervals. The work of a man who designed buildings that lasted, who believed in the integrity of his materials. The newer sections were different, rawer. The seams uneven, the tacks irregular, less interested in craft than in coverage. Not the work of someone who had learned the method from a journal. The work of something that had learned hunger first and technique second. The older work stopped around the midsection of the south wall. The newer work covered everything else. Albert had worked for 19 years. The twins had been working for 50. Along the south wall, shelves, glass jars sealed, labeled in a small, careful hand. The labels were in Italian. Lisa's university Italian was functional at best, but she could read enough. The jars contained eyes, organized by color, brown, hazel, green, blue, gray, each jar holding perhaps a dozen, floating in something clear. Dozens of jars, more eyes than either of them wanted to count. She moved along the shelves slowly. The jars at the far end were different. The labels there were older, the handwriting slightly less controlled, not the careful architectural hand of the later entries, but something earlier, something that had not yet settled into method. These jars were dated. The earliest she could find was 1955, 1 year after the camp opened. She counted the dated jars, 31. 31 jars spanning 19 years, each one dated, each one labeled with a location that was never Aldenmere. Harrisburg, Scranton, Philadelphia, Erie. Bus routes, she realized. Towns along bus routes. Places a traveling architect might pass through. Places where a child alone on a platform or a street corner might accept help from a man with a kind face and a car. She thought about the camp running clean for 19 years. All those summers, all those children who came and went safely. Of course they were safe. They were the cover. She didn't say this out loud. She wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. On the work table in the center of the room, tools, surgical in their precision, laid out in order of size on a cloth that had long since stiffened around them. Bone saws, retractors, something that looked like a liver clamp, the kind used in surgical theater. And photographs, pinned directly to the skin on the walls, black and white, most of them, though some were older. People, adults mostly, occasionally children, posed with their own severed heads held at their sides like luggage. The faces of the holding figures were calm. That was the thing that got into Lisa's chest and stayed there. Not triumphant, not manic. Calm. The way a craftsman looks when the work is going well. Tom made a sound, not a word, just a sound. The headstones, Lisa said quietly. Sarah said there's a graveyard. I didn't see a graveyard. South end, near the bench, we need to go. Tom turned toward the stairs without another word. Lisa followed. She kept her flashlight on until they were both out of the basement. And then she stood in the upstairs hallway and breathed through her nose for a moment. You okay? Tom asked. No, she said. Are you? He thought about it. No, but I'm... He stopped. Started again. I don't have an explanation for that room. I know, I need to have an explanation. I know, Tom. He was quiet the rest of the way out. The graveyard was exactly where Lisa had said, south end, just east of Albert's bench, in a clearing so deliberate it felt like it had been waiting to be found. 5 headstones in a row, the same gray granite, the same proportions, the same mason's hand. No names, no dates. Numbers carved deep into each face. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Lisa stood in front of them and counted children. 3 dead of fever, 2 missing in the woods, 5. These are his children, she said. Tom stood behind her. She heard him breathe. He buried them here, Tom said. All of them. The ones who died and... He stopped. And the ones who didn't, Lisa finished. The ones the woods took. He put stones up for them too. Or, Tom said, and then stopped again, because the other possibility, that the stones meant all 5 had ended up here, including Alicia and Francine, was not a thought either of them wanted to finish out loud in this particular clearing on this particular afternoon. They stood there for a while. The waterfall was audible from here, Francine's drop, the sound of it constant and indifferent. Tom was still looking at the stones when Lisa said it. The jars go back to 1955, 1 year after he opened the camp. Tom turned. 31 of them, she said, all labeled with cities, all dated. Same method, same removal. She paused. He was practicing. Practicing, Tom repeated. Or maintaining, keeping the ritual active. Believing if he kept the conditions right, kept the offering consistent. She stopped, started again. The journal has a word he uses, repetizione, repetition. He writes it like it's a principle, like if you perform a thing correctly enough times, the universe eventually has to answer. Tom looked at the 5 stones. He killed children for 19 years and nothing happened, he said. Nothing he lived to see, Lisa said. They stood with that for a moment. The camp, Tom said slowly. He needed the camp to stay open. Needed the reputation. Needed people to trust him with. He stopped. With their children, Lisa said. Yes. He needed to be the kind of man no one suspected. The camp was how he stayed that man. Tom sat down on the ground between the graves. Not dramatically, just sat down, the way a person sits when their legs make a decision before their brain does. How many, he said. It wasn't really a question. At least 31 that I can date, Lisa said. The earlier jars aren't labeled. I don't know how early it starts. She looked at the first stone, the Roman numeral cut deep into granite. He lost the twins in 1949. The camp opened in 1954, 5 years between. I don't know what he was doing in those 5 years, and I don't want to know, but I think... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. They reconvened at base camp as the light started going. All 5 of them, sitting in the broken fire pit ring, equipment spread on the ground between them. Sarah laid the logbook down in the center. Mark put his thermal footage beside it. During the day, he'd picked up heat signatures inside the tree line that he couldn't account for, and had spent 3 hours not mentioning to anyone. Sarah read them the last entry. They're coming from the wall side, not the woods side. Nobody said anything for a moment. Chapter 4. The Descent. On the 5th day the sound started. Not at night, that was the thing. It came in the afternoon, while the light was still good, while there was no reasonable excuse for fear. A low sound, almost below hearing, felt more in the chest than the ears. Like something very large breathing slowly somewhere inside the mountain. It would stop for hours and then return without warning, and after 2 days of it, none of them could agree on whether they were actually hearing it or had simply decided they were. Mark said it was geological. Settling rock, pressure differentials, the waterfall creating resonance in the stone. He said this with the particular focus of a person who needs their explanation to be correct. Emily didn't argue with him. She'd stopped arguing with any of them about what was real. She spent most of the 5th day sitting near the bench, not on it, facing the tree line beyond the wall, watching the place where the forest got dark and stayed dark regardless of the hour. She'd been reviewing the thermal footage Mark had dismissed, the heat signatures in the tree line, 2 of them, small, child-sized, appearing in the same position every night at the same time and not moving for hours. She hadn't told him yet. She was deciding how. Mark disappeared on the 5th night. He'd gone to reposition a camera on the east perimeter. 20 minutes, he'd said, half an hour at most. When an hour passed, Sarah went to find him. She brought Tom. They walked the east fence in both directions and found the camera on the ground, still recording, the lens pointing at the sky. The footage showed Mark walking into frame, crouching to adjust the angle, standing again. Then something at the edge of the frame, in the dark beyond the fence. Then Mark turning to look at it. Then nothing. The camera had fallen when he dropped it, but the recording kept running. 47 minutes of Pennsylvania night sky and the distant sound of the waterfall, and once, at the 32-minute mark, a sound that Sarah would later describe as organizational. The sound of someone arranging something with care. They found him at first light. He was near the old mess hall, set out in the open where he would be found. That was the part Sarah couldn't stop thinking about, the intention of it, the display. Decapitated, his liver removed with the same clean precision that had been used on 30 children 50 years before. His head placed on the remains of the flagpole, face outward, eyes open. His expression was not what she expected. She had braced for terror. What she found was closer to recognition. Like whatever he had seen before the end, was something his brain had categorized rather than refused. Tom was on his knees in the dirt. He didn't cry, he made no sound at all. He just stayed there until Sarah put her hand on his shoulder, and even then, he didn't get up for a long time. "We need to leave," he said finally, flat, factual. Sarah looked at Mark, at the flagpole, at the open eyes. "Not yet," she said. Tom looked at her. Something in his face had changed overnight and hadn't finished changing. He lasted 2 more days. That felt important later, that Tom Weller, who had come to Camp ALICINE because he couldn't say no to Sarah, who had spent the entire first week supplying rational explanations for irrational things, who had stood in Albert Francois's basement and said, "I don't have an explanation," like it was a confession, that he lasted 2 more days after Mark. He spent those 2 days helping, documenting, reviewing footage, sitting with Lisa over the logbook entries, trying to build a coherent picture of what Albert had been doing and when. He did everything they asked. He was thorough and steady, and once, when Emily came apart briefly near the fire pit, he sat with her for an hour and didn't say anything, which was the most useful thing he'd done on the entire trip. On the 7th night, he told Sarah he was sorry he hadn't listened better. She asked him what he meant. "You knew something was wrong before I did," he said. "Not about the camp, about everything. You've always known things faster than me, and I spent a lot of time not giving you credit for that." Sarah looked at him for a moment. "Get some sleep," she said. He didn't. They found him in the morning in the forest on the south side of the property, 30 feet from the graveyard, 30 feet from the 5 numbered stones. Arranged the same way as Mark, the same deliberate placement, the same clean removal. His expression was different, though. Where Mark had looked like recognition, Tom looked like grief. Like whatever had come for him in the night had shown him something he wished he'd understood sooner. Lisa sat beside him for a long time. She held her notebook but didn't write in it. "He just started believing," she said to no one in particular. "That's not fair." No one told her that fair wasn't a category that applied here. Sarah found the truth in the basement. She'd gone back alone, which was either brave or broken. She was no longer sure there was a difference. She'd brought a lantern this time and stayed long enough to read the labels on every jar, to look at every photograph, to stand in front of Albert's tools and understand them, not as the artifacts of madness, but as the artifacts of method. There was a journal behind the shelves. Leather, old, the Italian too dense for her to fully read, but the dates legible, the drawings unmistakable. She photographed every page. Lisa translated what she could that night, while Emily kept watch outside. Albert's mother had practiced what Lisa, choosing her words carefully, called restorative magic. The word in the journal was Italian, older than modern Italian, something closer to richiamo, a calling back. The theory, as best Lisa could reconstruct it, was that death was a departure, and departure could be reversed if the price was sufficient. The price was always specific. The journal was very clear on this. The price for 2 lives was 2 lives. The price for children was children. The taking had to be exact, the liver, because the liver was where the Italians believed the soul resided. The head, because you couldn't bring someone back to a body that looked like it was waiting. Albert had done everything correctly. He had killed Alicia and Francine, his own daughters, the living ones, the ones who could walk and speak and ask him why, and offered them according to the instructions his mother had given him. He had waited. Nothing came back. So he'd built walls around the place where he'd done it. He'd built a camp, filled it with children summer after summer, maybe believing the proximity would help, maybe just unable to stay away, the way people sometimes can't stay away from the thing that broke them. And for 19 years, nothing happened. The journal's middle section was the hardest to read, not because of the Italian, but because of the tone. The early entries had the quality of grief, raw, sometimes barely coherent. But somewhere around 1957, the tone changed, settled, became almost clinical. He had stopped mourning and started working. She found the entry from 1961, 2 years before he died. Lisa's translation came back in pieces. "I have done everything correctly. I have been faithful to the method. I have given more than was asked. The answer does not come, and I begin to think the answer will not come in my time. This does not mean the answer will not come. A foundation does not know the building it supports. I have laid the foundation. What rises from it is not mine to see. He had known. Somewhere in the last years of his life, Albert Francois had understood that he wasn't going to be there for the result, and he had kept going anyway. Had kept the basement, kept the ritual, kept the camp open and respectable and trusted. Had kept everything exactly as it needed to be for whatever came after him. He hadn't failed. He'd prepared. The camp had run for 11 more years after his death, clean, supervised by a board of community members who had no idea what they were sitting on top of. 11 more years of children arriving safely. The walls Albert had built, holding everything exactly in place. Until June of 1974, when Alicia and Francine decided the foundation was ready, and collected on everything their father had built for them. The spell hadn't failed. It had just taken 19 years to work. And what came back was not what he'd sent. The ritual was meant to reverse death. It did, but death changes what it holds. What walked back out of whatever place the twins had been for 19 years was not Alicia and Francine. Not the girls who had trusted their father, who had followed him into the woods that September afternoon, who had died believing it would mean something. What came back wore their shape, knew their name, and had 19 years of waiting folded into it like a hunger that had learned to be patient. The scout logbook had it right. They came from the wall side, not the woods side, because the walls Albert had built to contain the ritual, the walls everyone assumed were meant to protect the campers, had been doing exactly what he'd designed them to do. Holding them in, keeping them close, feeding them summers, until 1974, when there were enough. The sound came while Lisa was still reading. The deep, chest-felt resonance from inside the mountain, closer than it had ever been, directly below them now, directly below the basement floor. And then two sounds, light, rhythmic, coming down the outside hallway toward the basement stairs. Small feet, a child's gait. Two children, side by side. Emily made a sound in the doorway, and then Emily was gone, pulled backward into the dark of the hallway so fast the doorframe shook. Lisa ran. Sarah stood at the bottom of the basement stairs and looked up at the doorway at the top and saw, for just a moment in the thin light from the hallway, two figures standing side by side, small, girl-shaped, still. Their faces were in shadow. She couldn't see their faces. She ran. She found Lisa outside near the fire pit, alone. Emily was gone. They searched for 4 hours. They called until their voices went. They found nothing, not a trace, not a sound, not a disturbance in the undergrowth. The same nothing that had swallowed Alicia and Francine in September of 1949. The woods gave nothing back. They never had. Lisa sat down in the dirt near the fire pit and looked at her notebook and then closed it and set it beside her. I documented everything, she said. Like that should have protected her. Like that should have protected Emily. Sarah sat beside her. They stayed there until the dark came all the way in. In the morning, Lisa was gone too. Sarah had fallen asleep despite herself, her back against the stone ring of the fire pit, and when she opened her eyes, she was alone. The camp was silent except for the waterfall, Francine's drop, which had never stopped and would not stop. The bench on the south end faced it as it always had. 2 pairs of shoes on the bench now, not one. Sarah stood in the middle of Camp ALICINE and understood something. She was not being hunted. She had not been left alive by accident. She was being sent back. She walked out the way they'd come in, through the gate, still unlocked, down the logging road to the van. The keys were in her jacket where she'd put them on the first night and never moved them. She drove to Aldenmere. It was early morning, a Saturday, the diner just opening, a man she didn't know walking a dog down Main Street. The town looked exactly as it had when they'd arrived, small, quiet, the mountains pressing in, the church waiting with its bell, normal, completely unaware. She parked on Main Street and sat in the van for a moment. She was aware of herself the way you're aware of a room you're standing outside of. She could see her hands on the steering wheel. She could feel the seat beneath her. She could think. That was the terrible part. She was entirely present for all of it. But the thinking was behind glass now, behind something thick and clear that she could press her hands against and not move. She wanted to scream. She did scream, inside that glass, the whole drive down the mountain. Outside it she was calm. Outside it she was already smiling. She got out of the van. The man with the dog nodded at her. She nodded back. Then she took out her phone and opened her university email and began to compose a message to Dr. Renata Voss's independent research seminar. She wrote about Camp ALICINE. She wrote about the history, the legend, the unsolved case. She wrote about how much there was still to discover. She wrote that she'd been there herself, and it had been the most extraordinary experience of her academic life. She wrote that she'd be happy to take anyone who was interested. The cursor blinked at the end of the message. She pressed send. Epilogue. 11 weeks later, Dr. Voss received a missing persons inquiry from the Aldenmere Sheriff's Office regarding 7 graduate students who had signed up for Sarah Okafor's follow-up research trip and had not returned. Voss called Sarah's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. Leave me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can." Her voice sounded exactly like Sarah. Voss left a message. She waited 2 days. She called again. On the 3rd call, someone picked up. Silence for a moment. Then, "Dr. Voss." A pause. Then, "You should come see what we found." Voss stood in her office on the 4th floor of the Humanities building and looked out the window at the October campus and felt something she hadn't felt since she was very young and didn't have language for yet. "Sarah," she said carefully, "are you all right?" The pause before the answer was a half-second too long. "I'm wonderful. I think you'd find it very interesting up here. I think you'd want to bring some of your other students." Voss ended the call. She stood at her window for a long time. Then she opened her desk drawer and took out the research file Sarah had submitted at the start of the semester. The thick one, the one that had impressed her, all those months of correspondence with a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Holt in a town called Aldenmere, Pennsylvania. She found the address of the Historical Society. She wrote Mrs. Holt a letter, longhand, and drove it to the post office herself. The letter asked one question. "Is there anyone left in Aldenmere who remembers what happened to the last group that went to Camp ALICINE?" She mailed it on a Tuesday. She did not hear back. On the bench at the south end of Camp ALICINE, facing Francine's drop, 3 pairs of shoes sat side by side. Left foot, right foot, laces still tied, waiting.